Most people read the final chapter of the Book of Ruth as the perfect romantic ending. The long, bitter struggle of a young Moabite widow is finally over. The wealthy landowner from Bethlehem has stepped in to save her. The stage seems set for a wedding. But when you open Ruth chapter 4, there is no wedding aisle. There is no romance. Instead, the chapter opens in a courtroom. Verse 1 tells us that Boaz went up to the gate of the town and sat down. To a modern reader, that sounds like a casual detail. A man taking a rest at the edge of the city. But in ancient Israel, the city gate was not just a place where people walked in and out. The gate was an architectural stronghold, often built with deep alcoves and stone benches. It was the center of civic and legal life. It was the courthouse. The gate was where judges heard disputes, where property rights were transferred, and where public justice was carried out. When Boaz walks to the gate and sits down, he is not resting. He is formally opening a legal proceeding. He spots a specific man passing by and tells him to sit down. Then, Boaz does something very deliberate. In verse 2, he gathers 10 of the elders of the city and tells them to take their seats. This is not a casual conversation between neighbors. 10 elders constitute a legal quorum. It is an ancient jury. Boaz is preparing to litigate a case. For the original readers of this text, the tension in this moment would have been thick. The quiet romance of the harvest fields from chapter 2 is gone. The dramatic midnight encounter on the threshing floor from chapter 3 is over. Now, in the stark light of day, everything comes down to a strict interpretation of ancient Jewish law. The stakes could not be higher. The survival of Naomi, the future of Ruth, and the legacy of their dead husbands all hang in the balance of this public negotiation. If this legal proceeding fails, Naomi and Ruth face permanent poverty and the erasure of their family line. And the outcome is far from guaranteed. There is a massive obstacle sitting right there at the city gate. The unnamed man Boaz just called over has a prior legal claim. According to the law of the land, Boaz cannot simply marry Ruth just because they care for each other. He cannot just buy Naomi's empty fields because he has the money to do so. The law demands something much more complex and much more costly. Boaz is submitting himself entirely to a rigid legal system to win the right to save them. If we read this final chapter only as a cultural love story, we will miss the profound theological architecture operating beneath the surface. We will miss what the biblical author is actually trying to show us. Because the Book of Ruth is not primarily a story about a wealthy man marrying a poor widow. It is a brilliant, intricate demonstration of one of the most important concepts in the entire Bible. A concept that stretches from the book of Leviticus all the way to the cross of Christ. To understand what Boaz is actually doing at the gate, and to see why this legal drama points directly to the core of the Christian faith, we have to look past the romance. We have to look at the ancient law code of Israel. Everything in this courtroom scene, and everything in the lives of these two widows, hinges on a single, specific Hebrew word. The word is goel. It appears repeatedly in the original Hebrew text of the Book of Ruth. In our English Bibles, it is usually translated as redeemer or kinsman-redeemer. Over the centuries, the word redeemer has become a religious term. We sing it in hymns. We use it to describe spiritual salvation. We hear it in sermons. But to the men sitting on the stone benches at the city gate in ancient Bethlehem, the word did not sound spiritual. It sounded expensive. To understand what Boaz is attempting to do, we have to go back to the law code, specifically to Leviticus chapter 25. When God brought Israel into the promised land, he established a unique economic system. Land was never meant to be sold permanently. It was tied to a family name, passed down as a permanent inheritance. But tragedy happens. Famines strike. Debts pile up. A family might be forced to mortgage or sell their ancestral land just to survive. If the poverty deepened, they might even be forced to sell themselves into indentured servitude. Without a legal safety net, that family would be erased from the community. Their land would be gone. Their name would be forgotten. So, the ancient law created a designated rescuer, the goel. And the goel had three primary responsibilities. First, if a relative had sold their land due to poverty, the goel was required to step in and buy it back. Second, if the relative had been sold into servitude, the goel was required to pay the ransom and set them free. Third, and perhaps most difficult of all, if a relative died without an heir, The Goel was expected to marry the widow. He would raise up a child to carry on the dead man's name, ensuring the family line did not perish from the earth. Notice what all three of these actions require. They require a radical sacrifice of personal wealth for the sake of someone else. The Goel uses his own money to buy back the land, but the land does not ultimately enrich his own estate. It belongs to the rescued family. The Goel pays the heavy ransom, but he does not gain a servant. He gains a free brother. The Goel marries the widow and raises a child, but the child does not carry his own name. The child inherits the name and the property of the dead relative. To be a kinsman-redeemer is to willingly absorb another person's ruin. It is to step into their poverty and spend your own resources to pull them out. It is a rescue that costs you everything and gives the rescued person the reward. This is the exact situation Naomi and Ruth are facing. Naomi has returned from Moab completely empty. Her husband, Elimelech, is dead. Her 2 sons are dead. The family land has either been sold or sits abandoned, useless to 2 widows in a deeply patriarchal society. They are standing on the very edge of total erasure. They desperately need a Goel. They need someone with the wealth to buy back the land, the willingness to marry Ruth, and the grace to preserve a dead man's name. Boaz is willing. He has the wealth. He has the character. He is sitting at the gate, ready to take on the massive burden of this redemption. But there is a problem. Boaz is not the closest relative. According to the strict hierarchy of the law, he does not have the legal right to step in. Someone else is ahead of him in line. And that brings us to the unnamed man sitting across from Boaz at the city gate. A man who holds the legal right to save Naomi and Ruth, and who is about to make a decision that will echo through the rest of biblical history. The law of the Goel was not a volunteer system. It was a strict, ordered hierarchy of blood. You could not simply skip ahead in line because you had good intentions or a noble heart. Boaz knows exactly where he stands in this legal order. He is a close relative of Naomi's dead husband, Elimelech, but he is not the closest. The man sitting across from him at the town gate holds the primary right. In the Hebrew text, this closer relative is never given a name. Boaz calls out to him using a Hebrew idiom, Peloni Almoni. In English, it essentially translates to a certain one, or Mr. So-and-so. The biblical author deliberately leaves this man anonymous. He is a blank space on the page. And as the legal drama unfolds, we begin to see exactly why his name is forgotten. But right now, in the presence of the 10 seated elders, this unnamed man holds all the power. He has the absolute legal right of first refusal. Boaz opens the court case. He speaks carefully. He says to the unnamed relative, Naomi, who has returned from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Boaz tells the man to buy it in the presence of the seated elders. He tells him to formally redeem the land. If he wants it, he must claim it now. If not, he must publicly step aside, because Boaz is next in line. Notice exactly how Boaz frames this opening negotiation. He starts entirely with real estate. He does not mention the young Moabite widow waiting back at the house. He does not mention the difficult, costly requirement of carrying on a dead man's legacy. He simply offers the land, and the unnamed relative immediately agrees. Without hesitation, the man says, I will redeem it. For anyone reading this story, this is the moment your heart sinks. If this unnamed man buys the land, the narrative is over. He will take possession of the fields. Naomi might receive a small sum of money to survive her final years, but the family line of Elimelech will still be erased. And Ruth will remain a marginalized, childless widow from a foreign country. Boaz will have no legal right to intervene. But why does the unnamed relative agree to the purchase so quickly? Because looking strictly at the property, this is a brilliant financial investment. Elimelech is dead. His 2 sons are dead. As far as this man knows, there are no living male heirs to claim the property in the future. By stepping in as the kinsman-redeemer to buy this land, the unnamed man is expanding his own estate. The fields will permanently be absorbed into his own holdings. They will eventually belong to his own children. He is technically performing a civic duty, but it happens to be highly profitable. He is completely willing to be the Goel as long as the redemption enriches him. He is happy to rescue the land because it adds to his own wealth. It is a cheap, safe redemption. But Boaz understands the deeper spirit of the ancient law. He knows that true biblical redemption cannot be separated from personal sacrifice. You cannot rescue the property while abandoning the people. The elders are watching. The unnamed man has verbally claimed the land. It seems Boaz has lost. But Boaz is not finished. Now that the man has publicly agreed to be the Goel, Boaz introduces the second half of the law, the heavy half, the part of redemption that actually costs something. Boaz is about to reveal the full price of rescuing this family. And when the unnamed man hears it, his reaction will set up one of the strangest customs in the ancient world. The unnamed man has just spoken the words that seem to seal Naomi's fate. He said, "I will redeem it." He sees an abandoned field. He sees a clear financial return. He sees a way to increase his own wealth while technically fulfilling a civic duty. But Boaz is a master of the law, and he knows the law requires more than just a real estate transaction. In verse 5, Boaz leans in and reveals the full weight of the redemption. He says to the man, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Notice what just happened. Boaz connects the land to the woman. He binds the property to the people. He is telling the unnamed relative that you cannot have the profitable part of the law without taking on the costly part. According to the deeper traditions of Israel, specifically the law of levirate marriage found in Deuteronomy chapter 25, a brother or close relative was supposed to marry a childless widow to raise up an heir for the deceased. Boaz merges this requirement with the role of the Kinsman-Redeemer. He makes it clear that the Goel is not just buying dirt, he is buying a future for a dead man. And this changes the math entirely for the unnamed relative. If he marries Ruth and she has a son, that child will not carry his name. The boy will be registered legally as the son of Ruth's dead husband, Mahlon. But the financial risk is even deeper. When that boy grows up, the land the man just paid for with his own money will not belong to his own children. It will be handed over to Ruth's son. The man would be spending his own wealth to buy the field. He would spend his own resources to raise the child. And in the end, he would give both the land and the child back to the legacy of another man. It is no longer a financial investment. It is a massive financial loss. And the man's reaction is immediate. In verse 6, the unnamed relative suddenly reverses course. He says, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." He wanted the land. He did not want the loss. He wanted the blessing, but he refused to carry the burden. The text tells us his reason exactly. He is worried about his own inheritance. He is worried about his own name. To save the family of Elimelech, he would have to damage his own estate. To rescue Ruth, he would have to empty his own pockets. He is unwilling to do it. This is exactly why the biblical author leaves this man anonymous. The man who was so desperate to protect his own name is remembered by biblical history as a blank space. He fades into complete obscurity because he refused to pay the price of redemption. But Boaz does not blink. He is fully aware of the cost. He knows it will require immense sacrifice. He knows he will be raising a child to carry on another man's legacy. Boaz is willing to absorb the ruin. He is ready to step in where the closer relative failed. But in the ancient world, you could not simply walk away from a legal claim with a verbal agreement. The transfer of the right of redemption had to be legally binding. It had to be finalized in front of the 10 seated elders. And to seal this transaction, the men at the city gate perform a ritual that looks completely bizarre to modern eyes. But in ancient Israel, it carried the full weight of a signed contract. It involves a single sandal. The unnamed relative has just backed out. He tells Boaz to take his right of redemption. And then, verse 8 says, "He drew off his sandal." To a modern reader, this is an incredibly strange way to close a legal negotiation. Today, we sign contracts. We notarize documents. We shake hands. In ancient Israel, they took off a shoe, but this is not a random, meaningless cultural quirk. It is a deeply symbolic legal action. In fact, the biblical author pauses the narrative in verse 7 to explain it to us. The text says that in former times in Israel, concerning redeeming and exchanging, to confirm a transaction, a man would take off his sandal and give it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. Why a sandal? Think about the ancient world. If you owned land, how did you experience it? You did not survey it on a digital map. You walked it. Your foot, wearing your sandal, was the physical point of contact between you and your inheritance. To place your sandal on a piece of ground was a recognized symbol of authority, ownership, and the right to possess it. When the unnamed relative reaches down, removes his sandal, and hands it to Boaz, he is making a profound visual statement in front of the 10 seated elders. He is saying, I am permanently removing my right to walk on this land. I am surrendering my legal claim to this family, and I am handing that right entirely to you. It is a binding, irreversible transfer. The man who was terrified of losing his own wealth walks away. His part in the biblical narrative is over. He kept his estate safe, but he lost his place in history. And Boaz steps forward. He now holds the legal right. He holds the immense responsibility. He has fully taken on the heavy, costly mantle of the Kinsman-Redeemer, the Goel. Boaz turns to the 10 elders and to all the people standing around the city gate. In verses 9 and 10, he delivers his formal, public declaration. He says, You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Notice the absolute finality of his words. He does not try to negotiate a better deal. He does not take the profitable fields and leave the widows to fend for themselves. He buys the broken history. He takes the entire weight of Naomi's tragedy and Ruth's poverty onto his own shoulders. He fully embraces the cost. The elders and all the people at the gate reply with a single, unified voice. They say, We are witnesses. This is the ancient equivalent of the judge's gavel striking the bench. The transaction is sealed. Pause for a second and look at what has just happened. This was never a simple love story. This was a grueling, high-stakes legal negotiation over the price of human life. Boaz had to navigate a rigid system of law, face down a closer relative, and publicly commit his own wealth and name to save a family that had absolutely nothing to offer him in return. He is the perfect kinsman-redeemer. The tense scene at the gate closes. Boaz and Ruth are married. The Lord grants conception, and Ruth gives birth to a son. The legal transaction has become a living reality. But the true emotional impact of this redemption is not seen in Boaz. And surprisingly, it is not even seen in Ruth. The greatest reversal of this entire story centers on the woman standing quietly in the background. The legal transaction at the gate is complete. Boaz and Ruth are married, and the text tells us the Lord gives conception. A son is born. By all conventional storytelling rules, this is where the narrative focus should stay. We expect the ending to center on the wealthy Redeemer, the faithful Moabite bride, and their new baby. But the biblical author does something unexpected. The narrative focus shifts away from Boaz. It shifts away from Ruth. It lands entirely on the older woman standing in the shadows, Naomi. To feel the weight of this moment, we have to remember how Naomi arrived in Bethlehem back in chapter 1. She came back from Moab devastated. Her husband and her 2 sons were buried in foreign soil. When the women of Bethlehem saw her walking back into town, they were shocked. They looked at her broken state and asked, "Is this Naomi?" Her response was a portrait of total grief. She told them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Mara means bitter. Naomi believed her story was over. She believed she had been permanently emptied by God. She was a woman waiting to die in poverty, leaving no legacy behind. But now, in chapter 4, we are back in the company of the women of Bethlehem, and the contrast is breathtaking. The women gather around Naomi. They do not call her Mara. They do not speak of bitterness. Instead, they speak a profound blessing over her. In verse 14, they say, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel." Notice what the women are doing. They are using the exact same word we just saw at the city gate, Goel. But they are not talking about Boaz. Boaz did the legal work. Boaz paid the financial cost. But the women are pointing to the newborn baby. They tell Naomi that this child will be a restorer of life and a nourisher of her old age. The legal redemption at the gate was necessary. It saved the land. It protected the name. But the text is showing us that true biblical redemption goes much deeper than property rights and legal contracts. True redemption takes a woman who is completely empty and fills her hands with new life. Then comes one of the most beautiful, quiet images in all of Scripture. Verse 16 says, "Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse." The woman who lost her own sons is now holding a grandson. The woman who claimed God had dealt bitterly with her is now holding the physical, breathing evidence of God's invisible grace. The bitter waters have been completely reversed. The emptiness is gone. The family line is preserved. The women of the neighborhood even give the child a name. They say, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they name him Obed. The story feels completely resolved. The legal tension is over. The widows are safe. The land is secure. The bitter mother is restored. You could close the book right here, and it would be a masterpiece of ancient literature. A perfect, self-contained story of local redemption in a small farming town. But the Book of Ruth is not a self-contained story. The biblical author is not finished. In the final verses of the chapter, he attaches a short list of names, a genealogy. Most modern readers skip right over it. But those final few lines completely reframe why this story was written. They reveal that this was never just a local rescue. When you reach the final 5 verses of the Book of Ruth, the narrative suddenly stops, and you hit a genealogy. It begins in verse 18. "Now these are the generations of Perez." Most modern readers skip over this section. To our eyes, biblical genealogies often look like ancient spreadsheets. They feel like lists of difficult names slowing down a beautifully resolved story. But in ancient Hebrew literature, a genealogy is never just filler. It is a theological roadmap. It tells you exactly what the biblical author wants you to see. This specific list contains 10 names, and the names the author deliberately highlights reveal that the local redemption in Bethlehem was part of a much larger architecture of grace. Look at the very first name, Perez. Why begin the list with him? To understand that, you have to know his story. Perez was the son of Judah, born centuries earlier in the book of Genesis. But his mother was a woman named Tamar. Tamar was a Canaanite widow. Like Ruth, her husband died. Like Ruth, she was left utterly vulnerable. According to the customs of that era, the family of Judah was supposed to provide a kinsman to marry her and raise up an heir. But Judah refused. He protected his own family and left Tamar abandoned. Tamar eventually took drastic action to secure the family line, exposing Judah's hypocrisy. In the end, Judah had to publicly confess that this Canaanite widow was more righteous than he was. From that deeply messy, broken history, a son named Perez was born. The people of Bethlehem knew this history well. In fact, when Boaz acquired the right to marry Ruth, the 10 elders at the city gate actually prayed a specific blessing over them. In verse 12, they said, "May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." This is not a random historical footnote. The biblical author is showing us a stunning pattern. God is not building his legacy through pristine people with clean, unbroken histories. He is building it through outsiders, through a Canaanite widow named Tamar, through a Moabite widow named Ruth. He is weaving foreign blood, deep grief, and desperate need directly into the covenant line of Israel. The genealogy continues. It moves down through the generations. It reaches Boaz, then his son, Obed, then Jesse, and then the list lands on one final name like a thunderbolt, David. With that single word, the entire perspective of the Book of Ruth shifts. Everything zooms out. This was never just a quiet, local story about a wealthy farmer and a poor widow in the small town of Bethlehem. This is the origin story of Israel's greatest king, David, the shepherd boy. David, the warrior. David, the king who would unite Israel, establish Jerusalem, and receive God's promise of an eternal throne. If Boaz had acted like the unnamed relative at the gate, if he had protected his own wealth and refused to redeem Ruth, there is no King David. The royal line of Israel was completely dependent on a Kinsman-Redeemer who was willing to pay the highest price. The story of Ruth reveals that before King David ever sat on a throne, his great-grandfather sat at a city gate and absorbed the ruin of a destitute widow. Costly redemption was written into the royal DNA. But the pattern does not stop with David. This genealogy proves that the Book of Ruth is a royal blueprint. And 1,000 years later, Another biblical writer will pick up this exact same list of names. He will open his own book by copying this genealogy. But he will trace the line past David, bringing us to the final, ultimate Kinsman-Redeemer. Matthew chapter 1 opens the New Testament, and the very first thing Matthew does is copy the genealogy from the end of the Book of Ruth. He writes the names Perez, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. But Matthew does not stop at the ancient kings. He traces the royal line through centuries of history, through the exile in Babylon, all the way down to a man named Joseph, the husband of Mary. And from Mary was born Jesus, who is called Christ. This is why the transaction at the city gate matters. What Boaz did in Bethlehem was not just a noble act of charity. It was a shadow. It was a living, breathing preview of the ultimate rescue. Jesus did not just arrive to teach moral lessons. He arrived to fulfill the ancient law of the Goel. Look at how perfectly the pattern holds. To be a kinsman-redeemer, you had to be a blood relative. A stranger could not pay the price. This is why the incarnation is not just a theological concept. It is a legal necessity. The eternal Son of God took on flesh and bone. The book of Hebrews says that because we are flesh and blood, he shared in our humanity. He became our brother. He became our kinsman. To be a kinsman-redeemer, you had to have the wealth to pay the debt. We were standing spiritually exactly where Naomi and Ruth stood physically. We were completely empty. We had lost our inheritance. We were bound by a debt we could never repay, facing permanent separation and spiritual death. But Jesus possessed the infinite, unsearchable riches of grace. And then, there is the unnamed relative, the one who had the first right, but could not save Ruth without destroying his own estate. Many theologians see a profound image in this anonymous man. He represents the strict covenant of the law. The law has the first claim on us. The law demands perfect justice. The law can point out our poverty, but it has no power to give us new life. It cannot redeem us. It can only leave us abandoned at the gate. But Jesus steps in, where the law falls short. Jesus looks at our ruined state, our complete spiritual poverty, and he says the exact equivalent of what Boaz said to the seated elders. He says, "I will redeem them." But the cost for Jesus was infinitely higher. Boaz risked his earthly wealth. Jesus emptied himself of heavenly glory. Boaz bought a field in Bethlehem. Jesus purchased people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. Boaz married a Moabite widow to give her a name. Jesus binds himself to a broken, sinful humanity to give us his perfect righteousness. To be the Goel, Jesus had to absorb our ruin. He stepped into our bitter waters. He took the absolute poverty of our sin upon his own shoulders at the cross. The ultimate transaction was not sealed with a removed sandal. It was sealed with his own blood. And just as the legal drama in Ruth ended with a spectacular reversal of life, a baby placed in the lap of a bitter widow, the ultimate redemption ends in resurrection. The empty hands of humanity are filled with eternal life. When you understand the weight of the Goel, the Book of Ruth completely transforms. It is no longer just a quaint pastoral romance about a wealthy farmer and a loyal daughter-in-law. It is a masterpiece of covenant theology. It is the story of a God who refuses to leave his people in the ashes. Every time you read the word Redeemer, you are not just reading a spiritual metaphor. You are reading an ancient, heavy, costly legal demand. A demand that only one person in history was perfectly qualified to meet. The transaction at the gate was never just a local custom. It was the quiet architecture of our salvation.